Hi everyone and welcome to Verity Babbs Art. Today I had the absolute pleasure of talking to Alayo Akinkugbe, who runs A Black History of Art on Instagram. We made this video as part of the Articulation Alumni Programme. Both Alayo and I took part in the Articulation competition, which is a public speaking competition for 16, 17-year-olds, where you speak about a piece of artwork for 10 minutes. Since taking part in 2015, I've been really lucky to be able to work with Articulation on lots of different projects. Most recently, I worked with them on a series of 3 short videos talking about public speaking, which you can check out on their channel, which I'll link below. In this video, Alayo has chosen 4 amazing artworks, and we also speak about the success of her account and the broader issues of inclusivity in art history. And I really hope you enjoy it. Today, I'm super lucky to be talking to Alayo. Alayo, please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Alayo Akinkugbe. I run an account called A Black History of Art on Instagram, and I'm going into my 3rd year at the University of Cambridge studying history of art. And A Black History of Art my aim with it is to highlight Black artists, sitters, curators, and thinkers that have been overlooked in history, and then also highlighting the people that are making art and in the modern day as well. So, yeah.
We're both members of the Articulation alumni. How was your Articulation experience?
It was great. I really, really enjoyed it. And I think that's the thing that kind of made me know that I would study history of art at uni, because it didn't feel like a competition. Like, it didn't feel like work or labor when I was like preparing for it and everything. I really, really enjoyed it. It was definitely like a turning point in deciding that I was going to pursue like history of art. And I did it in 2017. And yeah, it was great. And also I went to the finals at Cambridge, and I think that's what made me want to go to Cambridge as well. So like, yeah, it definitely had a huge impact. Like, weirdly, I didn't realize at the time, but I think it had a huge impact on like my future studies.
Yeah, it was the same thing with me. My heat was in modern art Oxford, so getting to be in Oxford talking about art, I was like, oh, I'd quite like to do this again.
Yeah.
Was art history something that was offered at your school, or was Articulation a kind of introduction to that?
So art history was offered at my school, which I was really, really lucky with. And I was kind of going into it blind, choosing it as an A-level, because I knew I liked art, but I wasn't very good at like painting. And I loved it from the first lesson. It just felt like I was like, I can't believe this is an actual subject. I can't believe I can do this as an A-level. So yeah, luckily we had that. But then the articulation competition was just something that like the teachers had talked about, and there were just like a handful of us from history of art who were doing it.
So the first piece that you've chosen for us to talk about today is actually the piece you did your articulation talk on. Do you want to just introduce that for us?
Yeah, so it's by Marie-Guillemine Benoit, and it was painted in 1800, I think. And it's recently been renamed as Portrait of Madeline, because they found out who they think the enslaved woman was. They think her name was Madeline, which I think is amazing. So at the time when I did it, it was still called Portrait d'une Négresse, excuse my bad French. Yeah, so I spoke about this piece, and I think I just kind of saw it, and seeing a neoclassical work like this that was depicting a Black woman in a very dignified way, where she's kind of like portrayed as you would maybe expect a white woman to be portrayed, was to me kind of fascinating, because I'd never come across anything like that in my studies. I remember at the time I made the connection between this painting and Liberty Leading the People by Delacroix, with like the whites and just kind of the dignified pose, and then it has a very limited palette with like red, white, and blue. So I was like, it's very like patriotic. Maybe she's meant to be a symbol of liberty. Although still now I don't really know what the meaning was behind the painting, but that was just like my interpretation of it. And yeah, I think more than anything, I liked it aesthetically, and it led me down this route of like thinking about Black sitters and things like that.
Throughout art history, it seems that the only times that you see a Black figure, it's often, if it's a female Black figure, it's often in this servitude role, where actually the portrait is about the white woman who's lounging on a chaise longue or whatever.
And also, I guess I should say for this painting, I think when I did articulation, I was talking about how she probably didn't have a say in how she was presented. So obviously she's semi-nude and everything, but she would have been enslaved or a servant, and it's unlikely that she was paid or anything for it. So she probably didn't have control over the way her body was presented.
It's an incredible piece, and I think that blank background almost emphasizes her more.
Yeah, exactly. It makes it really about her. It feels like a portrait that you would expect of kind of a noble person or whatever in that time, except for the nudity.
Pieces like this in art history, I suppose, on one hand, it's so exciting to have a black sitter and present in this really quite noble, graceful way.
Yeah.
But then obviously at the same time, there's an overwhelming other weight in your hand that is, she's enslaved. Think about the actual quality of life.
In the same way as other artists' models were, like, and probably didn't choose to, you know, have this painting done of her. Still love it. It's stunning.
Has portraits of black sitters or black artists or black curators been a large part of your art history education, or is this something that you really had to seek out on your own?
Definitely, I would say that it's something I had to seek out on my own, because a lot of, I guess, UK art history curriculums, or just art history curriculums in general, it's a very kind of Western field. So yeah, not many black artists or black sitters. But I did do a contemporary course this year, which is during which I started my account in February. And in that course, we covered so many black artists, and it wasn't kind of just looking at their race, it was just looking at them as artists objectively. And that was very, very enriching. Like, it was an optional course, and I was so glad that I had chosen it, because I don't think there are many other courses that would have kind of like opened me or exposed me to so many black artists. And that also inspired me to create my account. So I was like, there are all these artists that I've never heard of, and had I not chosen this course, I would have probably left university having never heard of them. So I was like, if I have this account, then I can keep like looking up more and more artists and like share it with other people.
And that's the big shame of this idea that all of these artists, this massive sort of bounty of brilliant art, you have to seek out yourself. And I mean, the art that portrayed black bodies or were by black artists in my degree were always sort of viewed under the lens of slavery, as that historical context, as if black history started with slavery, and after that they, you know, black artists stopped making art and just stopped existing, and that's why they're not in art history, which is just obviously not true. It's
not true, exactly. And I think that's another thing with the account, like, it's kind of saying like you really could choose to put black artists on the curriculum. Like, obviously it takes a bit more searching because there's less literature and everything on them. It's just kind of like blindingly obvious that they've been ignored for so long by art historians. So
and I guess also, like, living in the age of the internet at this point, to not include those artists has to be an active choice.
Exactly. I feel like it's so obvious, and it would be very easy to.
Should we move on to the next piece you picked, which is by Emma Amos?
I've got a lot of Emma Amos in my life at the moment, because Made by Women Zines and I are collaborating to release an issue about her. I hadn't heard of her, unfortunately, until she died a couple of months ago.
Oh, wow.
Had such a long career. She's an African American artist, and I think she was born kind of just after the Harlem Renaissance, like in the 1930s, I think. And her work is incredible. Like, this is kind of archetypal Emma Amos. So she has like the African fabrics around the side. They look kind of like West African fabrics, kind of the kinds of things I see in Nigeria, and we call it Ankara in Nigeria, but could be from other African countries. And then I like the classical reference, but the figure's like black instead of like white marble and everything. And then I think that's meant to be her, like the figure in the bikini. And then, it's kind of mimicking the kind of contrapposto pose with like the legs like that and everything. And this like weird kind of setting that's like, I can't tell if that's like a pool, but then there's also a garden. I don't know, it's giving me like Garden of Eden vibes, but like I love this painting, and I think the reason I chose it to talk about here is because it's very typical of her.
I'd never heard of her, and so the first thing that strikes me on this piece, knowing absolutely nothing about her, like you said, is these antiquity references, and almost as a standing point of reclaiming the history that has been ignored, you know, this idea that black people didn't exist in ancient Greece and ancient Rome, which is just a fallacy.
So she's been described as like quintessentially postmodern because of the way she references back to like art history in her own art, and like kind of, you know, reclaims or subverts it. I think she's amazing, like kind of like a hidden gem, and I can't believe I didn't know about her until a couple of months ago.
Looking at the pool, or this water, feels like this might be the second half of something like Hockney's Bigger Splash. Like, I love the idea that they're at the other side hanging out.
Exactly. In the larger painting, there's like Hockney Splash.
But she's painted herself with these very different leg tones.
I think she's kind of just thinking about perhaps complexion and like different layers of like blackness. Like obviously there's colorism within the black community, but then there's also how you're interpreted differently based on how light or how dark you are. Like your experiences will be different. I think that could be a reference to that.
And it's so interesting as well that the pose that she's taken is the pose of antiquity of statues of male heroes.
Kind of like Michelangelo's David.
Exactly, rather than it being a classical pose of, Venus holding something or sort of shying away. It's really quite brazen. Yeah.
And it's like the contrast as well between the like red bikini and then the like classical kind of like male pose is just like interesting. She's like half sexualizing herself, half kind of like just making these like classical references. I don't know, it's really interesting.
The next piece that you chose to talk about is actually, finally, like shamefully, the first artist that I recognise. El Anatsui. I remember seeing one of their works when I was briefly doing some invigilating at Phillips and seeing one of these works up on the wall. And they're enormous.
Yeah. I don't actually recall like a specific experience when I've seen one of El Anatsui's works in person. I've always like, I think probably I could have seen them at like Frieze or something like that without knowing who did them. But the pictures are like mind-blowing to me because like the picture that I'm looking at right now, like you're seeing it from a distance and it looks like fabric. And then it was only when I did some research and realized that he uses found objects like bottle tops and things like that I realized how incredible they were. Because I don't know, for me, when I first saw them, I was like, oh, it's like a draped thing, but it's made of loads of little pieces of like metal and things. I think this was made of aluminium and other found objects and things like that. And it's stunning. Like his work is amazing.
I think one of the things that hits me with these works is you imagine the labor that goes into essentially sewing a piece like this.
Yeah.
And that sort of immediately makes me think about this sort of unspoken labor of women throughout history, this like the unspoken labor of female artists who did embroidery, but obviously that wasn't counted as like a fine art, so they never get put in art history, or women who in history spent their whole lives sewing clothes for their husbands and children, and that's all they did. And that idea of it not being labor, it's women's work. Lots of female artists are left out of art history because they make stuff as a collective, whereas art history loves first and last names. That's what they love. So seeing the labor that this takes just reminds me of that sort of physical toil.
I haven't seen this one in person, but I just think it's so beautiful. I don't know, like getting up close to and seeing like the individual like stitches and the individual like pieces of aluminium would be amazing. And then just the idea as well, like playing with that idea of like something that's hard but then looks like soft or looks like a piece of drapery or something.
And it's so unashamedly non-traditional. Like non-traditional in the West of they're massive. They're made out of a material that isn't commonly seen in the art gallery. And this is bright red. It's not hiding itself away under the guise of being a little painting of, a Western sitter. It's big and in your face and different, right?
Yeah, I love it.
It was interesting watching people go around the viewing room in Phillips and coming across his work and just having to sort of readjust their eyes a bit because they've walked around and looked at lots of Warhols and lots of Hockneys. And then they have to stand in front of this massive thing and sort of get their head around
it. Yeah, and it's interesting because I think that's what scale does. So like, how I remember learning about this in school, about how you walk into like a cathedral and you kind of have I can't remember what it is. It's kind of like a wow effect, like because it's so massive, you sort of take a step back, or like your instinct is kind of like take it all in. I think that that's the same thing with El Anatsui's works. They're just so big and you don't kind of see something like that in everyday life. So you're very, very kind of aware of it. And it is so different to the other kinds of art that you see in a gallery.
And then last off,
When the Going is Smooth and Good, and it was made in 2017. I love this painting. I only came across it a couple of days ago. Basically, this work specifically has like a reference to Malik Sidibé, who was a Malian photographer, and I've talked about him on my account. And if you look in the left in the background, there's kind of this couple dancing, and you can see the woman in the dress is like from one of his most famous pictures. I just thought that was really cool how she's making references to to like African art and like the West African canon, if there was a canon of West African art. So yeah, I just really, really love painting.
And there are all these photographs, or certainly images, that are woven into all of the fabrics or into certain bits of fabric. So the central suit and the carpet and some of the walls.
I don't know the background of it, but the style is very quintessentially Crosby. Like, there's always this kind of like, it's difficult to determine what's background and what's foreground because of the collaging and everything. But I'm seeing like all these sort of like old photos and things in the background. So I'm not sure if they're like family things or they're just like pictures from like West Africa.
This tapestry effect.
Yeah.
Of all of the, you know, whether these are historical photos or family photos, they're all the things that have potentially built these people.
Yeah, things have had a lot of influence on the artist. It just looks like sort of 20th century West Africa, like especially the pictures and the frames in the background, like to the right of the man's head. There's people in like a gele and a iroambaba, which is like traditional Nigerian dress. And it looks like kind of like there was a lot of documentary photography going on straight after independence. And it looks like these are all those kinds of images. And I can imagine as an African artist, like I'm not an artist, but if I was an artist, I would definitely be influenced by the kinds of things that were happening just after colonialism.
So after independence, was there a big period of making sure that lifestyles are documented?
I mean, I feel like it because as I've been posting on my account, I've found loads of photographers like Malik Sidibé, and there's a Nigerian man called Ojai, and they have like a very similar style. And Ojai especially was kind of, he has a very documentative style. So he would, I don't know if you saw my post about the different hairstyles. So he's done loads of series like that, but he does them also on like gele, which is a head tie. And I think it was just kind of like documenting a new kind of life. So like with Malik Sidibé, like a lot of his pictures are like very vibrant, sort of people dancing, and it just kind of gives you that energy of like freedom and like just like freedom from oppression. And like, yeah, I think people were just trying to document the time. I think there was like an archival instinct happening. It just didn't like West Africa specifically, because I've seen so many photographers in that kind of 1960s time who have like very similar documentary style pictures.
That sort of need to archive, I suppose, feeds back into your account of Black History of Art.
Yeah.
How have you found that account has sort of changed your perspective on art history, especially given that you're still studying it from the Cambridge curriculum?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely made me realize how little can actually be covered in 3 years of a degree. Because, you know, when you're learning about a specific time period, you're likely to also be learning about that time period in a certain location somewhere. And it doesn't cover like everything that's going on in the world at the time. And it's not possible to cover the entirety of art history realistically in 3 years. So, yeah, I think my approach, in terms of changing my approach to art history, I think it's made me realize that I can't expect to have kind of everything that I want to learn taught to me, and that your degree should be taken as a degree, but your interest should definitely be pursued alongside. Otherwise, you're going to miss out on so many things that are interesting to you. And I guess the only real opportunities you have to do purely independent work are like when you have your dissertation or things like that. I know we had a dissertation in first year, and then obviously the end of the third year, like final dissertation. And so, yeah, I think it's just encouraged me to keep doing independent study and look up things that I'm interested in alongside my work, because sometimes you feel like you're being given everything you need to know, but actually there's just so much out there. And so I'd say it's changed my approach in that way. But for most of the time that the account has been alive, I haven't actually been at uni because of Corona. So we'll see how it affects my third year. But and my perspective has definitely changed since creating it.
The account has been hugely successful, and
unbelievable.
As someone who, you know, might up until the Black Lives Matter protest after the murder of George Floyd, that was a moment where I realised that the huge majority of the artists I follow on my account are Caucasian and from Western Europe or America, and the artists that I was sort of sharing because I like their pieces were Caucasian and Western, and that made, I think, a lot of people aware of this sort of lazy bias. It was stuff that that we never looked at in any critical way. We just sort of were like, oh, this is how this is. And so over the past months, and it's almost quite useful that it's been during lockdown because everyone's had a lot more time to think about their lives, their opinions. We spent a lot more time on social media.
Of course,
But accounts like yours have just been so eye-opening and very like pioneering. I think that you've done a brilliant job.
Thank you. I didn't really expect it to kind of just blow up so quickly in that way. Me posting a lot was coinciding with coronavirus and with George Floyd's death, and then the subsequent Black Lives Matter movement focus and like from everyone. I think that was kind of lucky in a way because it was a time where people were actually very open to sort of having their minds open, and everyone was suddenly aware of how much like unconscious bias they had and everything like that. So I think I was lucky to have created it at a time when people are becoming so aware and people are trying to sort of expand their interests and like look beyond just the white art world. And the reception has just been crazy. Like, I think the reason, first of all, I had the takeover of the Great Women Artists, which sort of gave it a huge push, and that was amazing. I didn't expect for so many people to be interested in that way. And then again, someone made an infographic, which went viral, and then that's when like huge wave more of like a huge wave of followers came in. I'm just kind of like still a bit in shock because I didn't ever expect it to get that large an audience. I didn't think that many people were interested in this kind of thing, because it's just like part of me started it because I wanted to see something like that on Instagram, but I thought it didn't exist because no one wanted to see it, which I guess is not true because now the audience has grown so much. But it's amazing and like mind blown.
And that's the thing of getting these artists and these curators and these thinkers onto a platform that is, as big as Instagram but also as big as your following is just so important in reiterating the idea that this isn't a niche part of history. This is a massive bit of history that everyone's chosen to ignore.
Exactly, it's just part of history. Like, it's not even like a separate bit. It should just be in there with everything else. And I'm realizing now that this is just such a huge, like, there will never be kind of an end to my posting, because there's always going to be more Black artists that I'm finding that have been ignored. And then I'm also like, I love to talk about artists from Africa as well, being Nigerian myself. So it just shows that it's just such a huge thing that needs to be included on art history curriculums, I think. Or just integrated into art history curriculums. It doesn't even need to be treated as something different.
So as soon as you say it's Black art history, it makes it seem like it's different from art history. Whereas it's just art history.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you so much for talking to me today. If you could just let us know where we can follow you and hear what you're up to.
Yeah, so you can follow me on A Black History of Art on Instagram. And that's going to be it now. I've got some ideas of things to do, but uni's approaching, so I'm not sure. But
Thank you so much for watching. You can follow Alayo and Articulation in the ways written below. You can follow me at Verity Babbs Art on Instagram, and I really hope to see you next time.